Hello, everyone. My name is Bruce Kogut. I'm delighted to be the moderator to a very interesting panel discussion we're going to have tonight on the topic of business implications of the presidential election. We are going to assume that the election has been won and announced, and there's going to be a new team in place of Biden and Harris. We can discuss later if we think we should look at other scenarios as well. But that's our opening thinking about how to approach this question. I'm a professor at the school itself. I teach two classes, one on governance and one on business strategies and solving social problems, where we talk a lot about politics and business and society, and how we hope that they all work well together. And sometimes it actually happens. We are obviously at a kind of a critical juncture in our this time of the year after an election. We have one team which is transitioning out, one team which is coming in. We don't quite know what's going to be happening over the next year, and there's a lot of reasons to feel that there's a lot of uncertainty to be considered as any time we have this transition. Makes it a bit different, of course. Right now is the extra sort of element of the pandemic, which is not by any means a minor uncertainty for business. And as we look forward, we don't know exactly when it's going to be a problem. We don't have to think about it anymore, or how quick the vaccines will be ready, or what's going to seems short term to us as solutions may actually turn out to be long term, whether it's in fashion or it's in health or it's in infrastructure, the topics we're talking about tonight. So these are hard problems, and since faculty is supposed to be smart, what I quickly did is said I'm going to bring in someone else to talk about these problems, and I'll just moderate the whole thing. So for that, I'm really delighted to bring in three people who have strong connections to the school. One of them is Anushka Salinas, who is the Chief Operating Officer over at the Runway, a graduate from CBS in 2010. We have Ashley Swanson, who joined us last year, faculty in health economics, whose research lies really at the center of many of the things we care about on the effect of politics and health. And then we have Donnell Baird, who is a graduate in 2013, which is not that long ago, but it's been enough time for Donnell to move from being a political community organizer in his previous time, then to now actually running a company he founded, Block Power, which is putting in infrastructure in the inner city areas. So we've asked each speaker to speak about 10 minutes, and then I will field some questions. I have some questions of my own to ask. And then after 15 minutes total of time, we'll go off to the next speaker, and we'll do this for the first 45 minutes, and I'll leave us some time at the end to hear from all of you. Anushka, you are the first on, and as I told you, I have fans at home who are anxiously awaiting to hear about fashion as well. So we turn it to you.
Good. Well, I love to hear that. Bruce told me that his daughter and wife are customers of mine, so I'm very appreciative of that. So for those of you that don't know Rent the Runway quite as well, we are fundamentally a brand and a business that relies on people leaving their homes. We started in 2009 as a special occasion rental business, then transitioned about 4.5 years ago into a business that also offered a subscription to the Closet in the Cloud. So think about clothes that you would wear to work and weekends and everything in between. And then most recently, we're in the process of launching a resale business for secondhand merchandise on our platform as well. So interestingly, we sort of started by asking customers to do the hardest thing first when we launched, go from the familiar behavior of buying a dress if you have an event to attend to renting it, receiving it one day before your event, and then, wearing it and returning it the following day. And then sort of transitioning into getting women dressed for every day, work and weekends. And then now in some ways offering the lowest barrier product that we possibly could offer, which is, purchasing items secondhand. So as of March of this year, our subscription business had sustained sort of triple-digit growth for the prior 4 years since launch. We were kind of eyeing a public event at some point in the future. Business was growing rapidly, happy days. And we had spent a decade kind of fighting to show customers that there was a smarter way to get dressed, and that 100% of the $2 trillion fashion industry did not need to be brand new, and that was going to be a growing opportunity over time. We really sort of pioneered this concept across fashion. We normalized the idea of sharing clothing, which was very nascent and kind of unusual in 2009 when we launched to a mass audience. We made it aspirational via a 700 plus strong designer matrix of really, wonderful and unique brands that we offer. And we kind of created an industry that is now sort of evolving with us and around us. So, then the pandemic hit in March, which we all know very well. And so I'll just take a few moments to talk about kind of what that has meant for our business. And then I'll opine on what I think it means for the broader retail industry, and happy to debate that with those on this call as well. But, the pandemic hit, and the first thing we really focused on, like many businesses, was, taking a critical eye to every part of our business, cutting CapEx and OpEx, and making sure that we got our own house in order kind of first as a quick response to the pandemic, to make sure that we could sustain our business going forward. Because we knew there was going to be a very large impact. As I said, sort of at the beginning, we're a business that relies on people leaving their homes. We knew that people wouldn't be leaving their homes for some period of time. But after we did that, we really sat as a leadership team and said, what about this pandemic, or what we knew about it today, is, what is that going to mean for our business fundamentally? Is it going to mean that our business is the same, more relevant, or less relevant in the future? And as we started to really do that work and learn about how COVID was impacting our business, we really understood that the circular economy was going to be of more importance going forward versus less. So, wonderful companies like Airbnb, took the pandemic and decided to sort of narrow the scope of what they were going to be offering over this period of time. That was the right decision for their business. For us, we really, we continue to believe that the circular economy is the way of consumption for the future, and for the way for women and others to get dressed going forward. And so we wanted to sort of broaden our aperture of what we were going to be offering. And so we started building into this sort of resale business, or secondhand for purchase business, that is going to be really leveraging the competitive moat that we've already built over the last 10 years, direct designer relationships, as well as complex technology and logistics to support a business in circular fashion. On kind of COVID's impact on the broader fashion, and accessories industry, there are long-term structural changes to the business that we had been seeing already. And much like every industry, right? I think this is a narrative that everyone will sort of feel is like, there were trends that were already happening, and COVID accelerated them significantly. It's like we lived 10 years in 1 year in some ways. And some of them are obvious, the shift away from brick and mortar to e-commerce, even in parts of the industry like grocery that it was really not very common. The shift away from department stores towards direct to consumer, and the shift of sort of the general online interaction towards community building via social media platforms. And one of the trends that we're really, really seeing, which I think is a tailwind for our business for sure, is that companies that prioritize convenience and online engagement with their communities are the ones that will do well. And perhaps more importantly is that people want to spend their money with brands whose DNA sort of matches their own personal values. And I think this became very, very acute in sort of June and beyond, with the social justice movements really taking hold. people were becoming more and more mindful of what they were consuming, with whom they were consuming it, and how they were spending their dollars. So I think that's a trend that certainly we have noticed in our business, and we have seen those impacts. And I think that, really is an impact on the broader retail landscape overall. We expect a second wave. We're in it. It's, like for most businesses, unless you're Amazon, or you're Moderna, there's not a lot of positives in a second wave. But living through the first one taught us some really interesting things about our business. People people use our service to sort of spark joy in their life. We got a lot of feedback from customers that I'm not really going anywhere, but I've kept my subscription because it's giving me a reason to wake up in the morning and feel beautiful and get dressed. And it's giving me sort of like the mental release, which I think is just awesome and something that we did not expect. And I think, lots of pieces of the industry have really been seeing that. The home, home art, anything that sort of sparks joy for people as they spend time inside. And then did you want me to comment now on sort of how I think the policies are going to impact, which was what you wanted me to talk about initially. So maybe I'll sort of go there.
Yes, go into those waters.
Okay. So, as you said, we're operating under the assumption that it will be a Biden-Harris administration. I think there's really two key things that we expect. The first is a nationally coordinated response to COVID that is hopefully going to be relatively swift and well executed. And that is nothing but awesome for my business. Certainly, I think generally speaking for retail, it will be far better than the alternative and what we've been living through. And our business is interesting, sort of like a bellwether for what's going on in COVID, right? And sort of what the consumer mindset is, as the pandemic, as we went through sort of like down waves, we saw our business picked up and vice versa. So we certainly, believe that there will be an enormously positive impact on our business coming out of this as people want to get back to celebration, as people see a vaccine getting deployed and wanting to really come back to normal life. We think that will significantly help. I think what will that do for the broader retail industry? I think it depends on what category you're really in. People have spent 9 or 10 months sort of looking at their closet and all the stuff that they didn't need. The 20 pairs of shoes of which you wore one over the last 10 months. So, is every single part of the retail industry going to win coming out, whenever there's a vaccine or whatever post-COVID looks like? I don't think so. I don't know that you need the 21st pair of shoes when you didn't even wear the 20 you had over the last 10 months. We certainly believe that a lot of those dollars will, get deployed into experiences and travel and away from, sort of consumption and ownership of things that people know they're not going to be needing. And they proved to themselves over the last 10 months that they didn't need it. We think that's a tailwind for our business for sure, because we're all about access versus ownership. But there will be, I think, lots of winners in retail coming, based on a policy of sort of a nationally coordinated response. And then the second thing that we think a Biden-Harris administration is likely to do is to put sustainability front and center of their policy. I think there was a lot of conversation on the campaign trail about this, and we certainly expect this to be, a reasonably top priority for the administration. This is, I think, great for us as a business. We've always known that circularity in fashion, kind of the act of sharing a closet or a wardrobe, was better for the planet. And we also know that fashion is going to have to be a part of the solution in an administration that prioritizes sustainability for the environment, because it's the number 2 most polluting industry on earth after oil and gas. And so, we will have to, we as an industry will have to be at the forefront of solving this problem. I think businesses like Rent the Runway, like ThredUp, like The RealReal will be leaders in, as we have been already, but leaders in helping to perhaps shape some of that policy, helping to, up the ante, up the bar of expectations. We are doing work to create an environmental impact plan in partnership with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation to really understand the impact of the circular platform and how that sort of benchmarks against traditional consumption models. And our goal is to not only set an example for ourselves, but also for the industry, who really needs to follow suit. And I think we need to just sort of raise the bar of expectation on the fashion industry overall. And so I'll leave it there.
Great, Anisha. Thanks so much for that. Want to encourage the viewers to submit questions to us. Let me start off with just a little bit of a fun question, and I'm not sure whether it's fair to ask you a historical question, but there used to be some belief that fashion would change with the economic, well-being of a population. So I think it was skirts were longer during the Depression. They came up later, and they were short. Went down again and then up again in the 60s. So what do you think is going to be the fashion going forward now with the Biden-Harris ticket coming in?
Well, I don't know that I associate this with the Biden-Harris ticket, but I associate with the timing is hopefully going to align with post-COVID. So, this is my own hypothesis, not, and nothing else, but I think that what we are going to see out of fashion is next year is going to align with the emotional release that people are likely to feel when there is some semblance of, somewhat widespread vaccination. So I think that there's going to be a lot of celebrating in, summer and fall of next year. I think there's going to be a more carefree, sort of devil may care attitude. And I think you'll probably see fashion follows that, so my guess would be bright prints, sexy, people wanting to go out and just like live their best life. So that's my prediction.
Sounds like a great.
Doesn't that sound good right now instead of like a sweater and sweatpants?
Good, right? Especially we already have winter right now, so.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a question which actually a few of my friends wanted to ask before them. So you serve a large population. You serve customers who can obviously want your product. They like the flexibility. They may keep some of it. They may return some of it. You find there's, if you had to think of segmentation of the market, is there a segmentation which is political, you think, or is it just, or lifestyle, which is correlated with politics, or is it just basically other things which explain that?
I mean, we've certainly seen during the pandemic, things that are not that surprising. We've seen that, liberal states, which have been, probably much more cautious as we've seen more locked down, that our business has been more depressed in those regions versus, Texas, Florida, and Georgia is a region that's performed extremely, well on a relative basis versus sort of like the Northeast. So you can do with that what you will. I think like post-pandemic, will that continue to be relevant? I'm not sure, but it has definitely been apparent during COVID that a significantly higher portion of our customer base remained active if they were in a state that probably was still having events. In Ohio, the restriction on a wedding right now, I heard this morning, is you can still have a large indoor wedding, you just can't dance. So I mean, right. So there's big differences which have implications on our business. Certainly, I don't know how that continues though.
Right, that's great. Thanks, thanks so much. Let's turn over now to Ashley and talk to us a little about health. Which I said to turn over to health, which would definitely be influenced by the politics happening in Washington.
Oh, great, thanks so much. So I'm Ashley Swanson. I just joined Columbia Business School about a year ago, so I'm relatively new to the area. I'm excited to talk about what's going on in health policy. You may have seen articles on increased stock prices after election night, especially for health insurers and hospitals. This was well before it was clear that Biden had won, and he has won. What was clear at that point is not what was happening with the presidency, but what was happening with the Senate, and specifically that a Democratic takeover of the Senate was going to be unlikely. And that means in turn that big sweeping legislation on healthcare is unlikely. There are going to be 2 runoff elections in Georgia in early January. The Democrats need both Georgia Senate seats in those runoff elections in order to take the Senate. And then even then the Democratic majority with Vice President-elect Kamala Harris casting the deciding vote would be pretty thin and there would really be no room for error to pass legislation. So, if that happens, what are some of the core tenets of Biden's health plan? First, a continuation of some of the policies under President Obama would be to focus on increasing coverage and coverage generosity in a few ways. So one way to increase coverage is to fix the ACA exchange subsidies. So I actually just signed my mom up for an Obamacare plan last year, so I'm very, very aware of the subsidy structure. So you qualify for subsidies to purchase an ACA exchange plan if you have income up to 400% of the federal poverty level. But that leaves a lot of people without any access to subsidies and a lot of people without any access to affordable health insurance. So one change that's been proposed is that the subsidy structure would change so that all families would be able to obtain exchange market insurance at less than 8.5% of their income, eliminating that 400% cutoff, which would provide more access to subsidies for a lot of people. Now, all of that's actually like politically very popular and maybe even bipartisan, but paying for it would be expensive. And President-elect Biden has proposed to pay for it by eliminating the Trump tax cuts above $400,000. And that is not bipartisan. That would be politically very difficult to do. A second way that Biden has proposed to increase coverage is to create a public option. The public option would be similar to an Obamacare plan. It could look like a silver plan or a gold plan, but it would be paying Medicare provider reimbursement rates, which would mean that it would be likely cheaper, in fact, much cheaper than plans that are now available on the exchange, and much cheaper than plans that are available through your employer. So that would be really tough competition for insurers. Insurance companies aren't going to like that. And providers would also not like it because Medicare reimbursement rates are about half of commercial rates for hospitals, at least. So, they would be able to opt out of providing services to people who are in this public option plan, but that would be really hard. And they do that they have the ability to do that for Medicare and Medicaid currently, but that would be really hard to do if enrollment in the public option is high, because that means they wouldn't have access to a lot of their consumers. So, that would be a big change. The third big change would be that Biden proposes to lower the Medicare eligibility age to 60 rather than 65, which would have similar implications to a public option because it would be creating a public option for a defined age group, those aged 60 to 65. So all of those would increase coverage quite a bit. And the second and third that I mentioned, the lowering the Medicare eligibility age and the creation of a public option, both of those things are very unpopular with providers and insurers because it creates a lot of competition with insurance companies, and providers, would be paid much lower rates. Currently, if somebody goes to the hospital and gets a knee replacement the day before they turn 65, the amount that is reimbursed to the provider is about twice as high as if they go the day after they turn 65. And so that's that has really important implications for providers' finances. And that altogether is why it seems that healthcare stocks have rallied a bit after the indications that we're going to have Senate gridlock came to the fore. So what else is going on? Another goal of a Biden health plan would be to lower drug prices. Through a variety of measures, like allowing Medicare to negotiate prices directly with pharmaceutical companies, to allow importation of drugs from other countries that have lower prices, to cap the rate of drug price increases at the rate of inflation. Anytime you try to regulate prices, you're usually trying to regulate them downward, which means that the producers of those products aren't going to love it. Some of this is fairly unlikely to happen if the Senate is in gridlock. So reimportation is probably unlikely to happen, and direct negotiation of drug prices is unlikely to happen. However, capping drug prices at the rate of inflation, that actually has some bipartisan support. Senator Chuck Grassley was one of the parties introducing a recent bill that would involve capping drug price increases in that way. So that one might actually happen. But this obviously has big implications for firms, especially pharmaceutical companies. How am I doing on time, Bruce?
You're good. I think you wrap up now.
Okay.
Some questions.
Okay, so all right, I'll say quickly. So a lot of these really big sweeping changes are unlikely to happen from where we stand right now, but the executive branch can still make a few big important changes. The current lawsuit that is trying to overturn the ACA is unlikely to happen at this point, meaning, thank goodness, 20 million people are not going to be dropped from the insurance rolls in the middle of a pandemic. So the ACA will stand, and I think President-elect Biden is going to bolster it in a variety of ways, including promoting marketing of the ACA plans, funding navigators to help people get insurance through the ACA, trying to improve premium, so removing the Trump reversal of cost sharing subsidies, which would lower premiums for silver plans on the exchanges. All of those things are relatively, I think, feasible for a Biden administration to accomplish, and wouldn't require sweeping legislation. So I'll stop there.
That was great, Ashley. Thanks so much. So one thing which should be a win-win is lowering costs, because then we wouldn't need to worry so much about how much money this is all gonna cost us. Maybe Republicans and Democrats will get happy and play together again, and the world will be in a better place. So what do we think we learned from let's say Operation Warp Speed? How fast drugs were developed which is amazing everyone, right? So but it's so costly to develop drugs. So is there something there we learned which you think will be permanent, or is that just a bit too much risk for us to continue with for the regular, the same things as normal?
Well, I think that you could think of Operation Warp Speed or just the broader international effort to develop vaccines for the novel coronavirus as being akin to the space race. I mean, there's a ton of innovation happening right now, and a ton of progress being made that I think most people who study innovation would not have thought possible a year ago. So I think we're not going to unlearn some of that. Some of the infrastructure that's being put in place to aid pharmaceutical companies, biotech companies, and investors in trying to develop vaccines in the future. I think all of that infrastructure isn't going to go away after we solve this particular problem with this particular virus. So I think that our ability to react quickly and develop new vaccines in the future is going to be much improved, and that's a wonderful thing. Obviously, I would rather this whole thing just hadn't happened, but the innovation I think has been very impressive.
So you mentioned one of my students works for Epic, and you didn't mention too much about the cost savings which might come from just better use of data and sharing of data, and Epic's more than happy. Other companies like it is more than happy to provide this for us. Do you see this as something which is going to be move forward? This privacy issues, will the Biden-Harris be tighter with privacy restrictions, or would it be helpful? So things like this to move it along.
So I'm not sure about health IT. I do think that some of the rapid increase in telehealth might be hard to unwind in the future. So, folks that have invested in companies that have invested in telehealth capabilities have seen their telehealth visit counts go up by 2 or 3 orders of magnitude in a relatively short amount of time, which is clearly a pretty important for companies that are actually developing telehealth solutions. And this big uptick in telehealth has been accompanied by relaxation in a number of regulations and reimbursement rules. So public and private payers have been more generous about reimbursing telehealth visits. Restrictions on practicing across state lines have been relaxed or removed. Some of the HIPAA protections on what kind of technology you have to have in order for people to do telehealth visits, some of that has been relaxed. And we're going to have to figure out what snaps back into place or what the new privacy and other regulatory protections are going to be in the future. And I'm not sure exactly what the Biden-Harris administration will have to say about that yet.
That's great. Thank you, Ashley, very much for your comments and giving us some hope to think that these big problems have possible solutions. So that's always great. Let me turn to Donnell Baird, changing industries now to infrastructure, green infrastructure, and it's he's got a bigger vision of the whole thing than one might think. So Donnell, tell us what your thoughts are.
Sure. Super excited to learn a little bit about Anushka and Ashley's takes. So yeah, shifting to smart green infrastructure. I run Block Power. I started at CBS in 2013. And we focus on analyzing, financing, and upgrading equipment in medium-sized urban buildings. So that's apartment buildings, schools, government buildings, churches, synagogues, gyms, buildings that are bigger than a single family home, but smaller than the skyscrapers in downtown Manhattan. So there's 5 million of these buildings across the country, and they waste $100 billion per year on fossil fuels that these building owners pay for, but don't even use. And they spend significantly more money on the fossil fuel energy that they do use. And so significant amount of waste, significant amount of greenhouse gas emissions coming from these 5 million medium-sized buildings. And so at our company, what we're focused on is analyzing these buildings through our software platform, making a recommendation as to what mix of clean energy or energy efficient equipment we can and should install in that building. And then we have a credit facility that we set up with some investment banks and invented a new structured financial product that allows us to invest in installing this equipment by hiring local, women, minority, veteran-owned construction firms, getting them trained and financing them to install clean energy equipment in these 5 million buildings. And so we think that we can save 20, 40, 50% of the $100 billion per year that's being wasted on fossil fuels, and of course reinvest that money that we save in additional priorities, and shift these buildings from burning fossil fuels to running off mostly renewable energy electricity, almost doing to a building what Tesla is doing to the automobile, right? Taking out the fossil fuel equipment, making it 100% green. So there's existing technology that allows us to do it. It's kind of just a building by building slog to persuade each building owner across the country that this is possible and now is the time to do it. And so that's what our company does. We built a software platform, structured financial product to make those investments. We've greened over 1,000 buildings so far, mostly in New York City, but have recently expanded to Oakland, California, to Milwaukee, to Chicago, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and to upstate New York, Buffalo, and Syracuse. We have some projects that we're working on, as well as Jackson, Mississippi. And so, the question that Bruce posed is how does all this change under a new administration? What was interesting is, we made a huge bet that Hillary Clinton was going to win in 2016. And, I had spent a lot of time at the Clinton Foundation. They were huge early supporters of our startup while we were in B school at Columbia. They provided a lot of early legal support and policy advice, and letters of reference for our first contracts. And I was 100% positive that Hillary Clinton was going to put me on some kind of clean energy advisory council or something at the Department of Energy. And I very much was looking forward to that. And so we were just crushed from a business perspective, aside from being an African-American and a Democrat and what all that meant that Trump won for me personally. From a business perspective, the Trump administration's shift towards prioritizing fossil fuels, rolling back the Clean Power Plan and the set of policies that the Obama administration had put in place, we'd taken in venture capital to build out our software to help implement those policies and build out a software layer on top of a lot of those policies. And so that was a real gut check for us, and we really had to make some serious adjustments. What was interesting and what we didn't anticipate is that because the Trump administration was so pro fossil fuel infrastructure at the federal level, it really forced governors and mayors who were concerned or alarmed about climate change, which at the local level is often bipartisan, and 150 cities across the country passed hyper-aggressive legislation that they were going to move their cities 100% off of fossil fuels within 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. And so even if you go to certain Republican towns or cities in Utah, a red state, you have cities that have passed legislation that they're going to be 100% renewable within the next 15 years, period. All the buildings, all the cars, everything. And so what we didn't anticipate is this kind of local pressure at the municipal level, at the state level, mostly in large, wealthy Democratic states, Illinois, New York, California. They passed, Green New Deal legislation across the state to focus on installing green infrastructure in buildings and in the transportation sector. But we also saw 150 cities. So as we move into 2021, one of the things that we think is really interesting is there's this business question of whether or not, how quickly are we going to embrace the changes that are coming to the energy industry and the energy grid more broadly? Are we going to continue to have a centralized energy system where we have utilities, we have massive coal plants or gas plants, or even massive centralized solar plants and wind power plants? In rural areas, we produce electricity and then we pipe that electricity down to the city. Or are we going to decentralize energy production, right? To where individual buildings, individual neighborhoods produce and consume their own energy on site without all of the kind of massive infrastructure that's required to move energy that's produced in upstate New York down to Brooklyn or down to Manhattan. And so how and when are we going to distribute and decentralize energy production and consumption in the same way that we've decentralized media, for example, right? It used to be centralized. Now there's social media. Everybody can become a content producer on their phone. And so that transition is coming to energy. And there's a question, how quickly are we going to embrace that transition? And should that transition be fossil fuel free, or to what extent are centralized or decentralized participants going to embrace renewables? And so if you look at a company like Tesla, huge bet on the decentralization of clean energy, right? Not only the vehicles, but that they're investing in rooftop solar panels on individual buildings. They're investing in individual batteries that you can put into your garage, right? To store the electricity produced from your solar panel to power your Tesla, right? This is independent energy production and storage. And then the incumbents, GE, for example, producing large energy plants, whether it's gas consumption plants or wind power plants, you have these large incumbents, GE, Siemens, Bechtel, that are really focused on large centralized infrastructure production. And so, the bet that we're taking and that we're making is that clean energy and energy is going to become decentralized. You're going to be able to own and operate and optimize it from your smartphone using the Internet of Things. And that's a huge opportunity for us to divest from fossil fuel infrastructure and invest in distributed infrastructure. And so the Biden-Harris team has made huge commitments to investing in smart green infrastructure. It remains to be seen whether that's centralized or decentralized. The other interesting element, Bruce, is that they have indicated that 40% of their total infrastructure investment will be in America's financially underserved communities, whether that's rural or urban. And so Biden has said he's going to invest $2 trillion in green infrastructure across the country. 40% of that is going to be in low-income communities as defined by the U.S. Department of Treasury. So our question is, who's going to own that? Who's going to operate it? Who's going to maintain it over time? There's workforce development implications for historically disenfranchised communities. We think that you need to build and deploy software and have a software platform that makes it easy for individuals to own and operate and maintain decentralized clean energy systems. And so that's what we're betting on. And yes, we've been spending a lot of time talking to the Biden transition team over the last week to move our agenda and to demonstrate to them that we think that there's a path forward for America to be a real leader here. So I'll stop there.
Wow, you got some big things in front of you about the way the world goes and how you fit in, and big players and the role of companies like yours who are coming up. So we have a few questions to you, which echo some other things, conversation I was having earlier, and then we can open this up overall. And what part of it had to do with was, if Biden and Harris come up successfully with an infrastructure bill, which is supported by Congress, something which everyone seems to be for, but no one seems to be willing to fund. But if that actually does come through, there's also the concern that corporate taxes might be higher. With maybe more regulations placed in time. So giving with one hand and taking with the other hand. How do you think that balance is going to be between those two?
I think Ashley made the case that there's going to have to be a bipartisan approach to healthcare. I think that's going to be the case for infrastructure as well. We're just not going to get to the level of investment that the country needs or that the Biden-Harris administration wants without a bipartisan approach. So what does that look like? Democrats and progressives, and I'm on the board of the Sierra Club, I'm going to throw them under the bus a little bit, but environmentalists want a giant, comprehensive, omnibus climate bill, right? Tax on carbon, regulation of utilities, smart grid legislation, solar incentives, all rolled into one giant package that they hope to move through to re-regulate the way energy works in this country, kind of like what Obamacare did. In my view, the odds of Mitch McConnell signing up for that's low. And Ashley outlined why. The Republican approach is they're not able and willing to sign off on anything that has climate as a label, but they can take individual components of the climate package and support that. They can support smart grid. We're going to call it cybersecurity for smart grid and say there's a national security angle because we need to prevent hackers from Russia and Iran from hacking into our country's electricity grid and taking the grid down, right? But Republicans can support a smart grid package that's going to be central to any climate legislation we pass. Republicans can support investments in R&D for battery storage, for capturing carbon from the atmosphere and converting it and monetizing it. Republicans can support a giant nuclear package. And so there's one question, again, of like, are we going to have a central bill or a decentralized bill? And the parties are kind of split on what we should do there, and we'll see how that shakes out. I think that in our view, the private sector wants to step up. When we talk to our partners on the infrastructure team at Goldman, they're not investing in oil and gas, not because it's like because it's bad from a social justice perspective. They're not investing in oil and gas because they've been losing money in natural gas investments for years. They're just losing money. It's just a bad investment, whether regulation or not. And so the private sector, Wall Street, wants to step in and provide lots and lots of capital for smart green infrastructure across the country. And Bruce, that makes me wonder if there's an opportunity to have public-private partnerships where we can finance the infrastructure that the country needs in partnership with Wall Street and infrastructure and pension funds without having to raise taxes automatically, right, in order to pay for it. So I do think that there's ways to do that. In our model, we're investing $50 million in the Bronx, right? That's private sector capital that's going to shift 500 apartment buildings from using fossil fuels to using 100% clean energy. That's a private sector transaction that's not going to raise anybody's taxes because it's not using government money. And so we think there's ways to do that across the country. I just think that's a part of the political and policy question of if we can get there. I'll remind you, there are a lot of weeks where President Trump wanted it to be infrastructure week, and so we do think there's ways of doing this, and we do think there's 10, 15 Republican votes in the Senate that are interested in infrastructure, and they might force additional tax cuts. They may force the Democrats to keep the Trump tax breaks in exchange for a climate or infrastructure bill, which in my view is a deal we should probably take.
All right. Yeah, that was great. No, thanks for talking about those issues. And I know, Ashley, for you too, the level of centralization versus decentralization is a big issue in healthcare. We saw that during the pandemic as well. And we saw maybe more of the problems it causes, but maybe it also gives inroads for new players to be coming in as well. So do you have any thoughts on that in terms of the solution coming along centralized lines versus the kind of the benefits of having a more decentralized public health approach?
Well, I guess maybe one way of answering this is to talk about what can happen, what can go wrong with the fragmented payer space. So, we have the set of people we have enrolled in insurance across the country are in employer-provided plans, exchange plans, Medicare, Medicaid, Medicare Advantage, Medicaid managed care, the VA. And when you disrupt any of those ways that people get insurance, all of a sudden, in the middle of a pandemic, when people really need access to healthcare, when people really need access to prevention, now it's not clear who's going to pay for it. And so, that's one way in which the pandemic has highlighted some of the problems with a relatively fragmented approach to public health and healthcare.
And you want to follow up, and then I want to turn back to Anushka on this. One of the things, Donnell, forgive me for bringing up something which I know you're active in. There's a lot of concern about the kind of pollution within homes. And it has all these effects for health, obviously. So, is there any thinking about how, again, kind of a cost approach to these things, where there's a win by just cleaning things up on a more systemic level, so there's less health problems? Is that on the agenda, or is that not really being thought about too much at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I'd actually be super curious as to how Ashley, might respond to this. I mean, back to this project in the Bronx, right? There's a natural gas pipeline that the utilities want to run into the Bronx to expand the natural gas supply to New York City. And environmentalists and regulators don't want to fund this pipeline. It costs like $2 billion, right? And they'll have to raise electricity rates across the city to pay for it. And so there's been kind of a temporary stay on this gas pipeline. The governor has instead encouraged the utilities to invest $400 million in green distributed energy systems in the Bronx to reduce the amount of gas demand in the Bronx thereby reducing the need to build this new increase in gas supply. The Bronx has the highest asthma rates in the country for a variety of reasons. One, there's several thousand buildings that burn oil for heat and hot water in the basement of the apartment buildings. And so there's a lot of local air pollution inside the buildings that gets captured and recirculated through the building's old antiquated ventilation system. And then the Bronx is also the food distribution hub for the tri-state area, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut. So all these trucks come in and bring food to the Bronx, to these warehouses, and the trucks like generate a lot of traffic and have a lot of pollution. Right. And so outdoor and indoor air pollution are pretty bad in the Bronx. And so when we green a bunch of buildings in the Bronx, right, we are reducing the amount of indoor air pollution and the amount of outdoor air pollution that makes it indoors, because we clean the air as it comes in. And so there should be a resultant decrease in the amount of people who go to the emergency room with chronic asthma attacks across the Bronx, which should save providers and health insurance companies money. And so there is this idea that if you can make green infrastructure investments, you have a set of avoided public health costs. Can you capture some of that avoided public health costs as a revenue stream and monetize it as a way of, continuing to make more investments in green infrastructure? And so certain parts of Obamacare, I believe, used to incentivize that. I don't know if they've survived the Trump administration, but we do think this intersection of public health and green energy, particularly in a time of COVID, is a really important intersection for everybody to explore from a policy perspective.
Actually, without putting you on the spot, because we don't expect you to be an expert in all parts of this question, have any thoughts on what you just heard?
Well, I guess putting together, what Donnell said with what you said about what you were asking about centralization. I mean, the main thing that a pandemic tells us about is externalities, and the main thing that environmental pollution tells us about is externalities. And that's where a centralized approach is really important, is figuring out, okay, if I have all of these independent actors making their own decisions about business investment and consumption, sometimes they are going to have negative spillover effects on each other. And I have to be the adult and make sure that, either through prices or through restrictions, somebody is taking account of those negative spillovers and mitigating the fallout. So I think that the interactions between public health and environment, like clearly an administration that takes account of those externalities is doing all of us a great service. I actually saw there was a Q&A about, is the Biden-Harris administration going to call for greater shutdowns in the economy? Well, this is a $16 trillion virus, and the economy is only going to get better if we get a handle on the virus because of externalities.
Sure.
We need a centralized approach. Sorry, that was long.
No, that was great, Ashley. We can have a long discussion on these details, which just matters, billions of dollars for the economy. But it's appreciate getting that high level response to it. Anushka, I can ask you a lot of questions like corporate taxes, effects, whatever, but I think we need something lighter than that. So I don't want to suppress that side of what you do in your business, but
we can keep it light. It's okay.
Keep it light on this, but there was one question which is Barry Jaruzelski asked, which is from my heart as well, is that does this mean that men, at least you talk about women as well, but never have to wear formal clothes anymore? We can just go around wearing T-shirts and whatever, appear on Zoom with sweaters, and that's it. Men don't have to think about what to buy anymore. That's that'd be just incredible, right?
It's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I think we've been seeing sort of like casualization of the workplace and just life over the course of the last few years, even prior to the pandemic. And certainly, I'm sort of depressed, not even from a business standpoint, but just from a personal standpoint, seeing how acceptable it's become to just really wear sweatpants and sneakers everywhere. So, I think that there will be a continuing casualization. That trend will continue. Certainly we think that people, even, come next fall are still only going to be coming back to an office maybe 50% of the time. I think flexibility is something that people are going to be sort of, companies are going to be forced to bake into, their return to work plans more than ever before. So, likely some continuing trend of casualization. I think especially for men, I'm not sure if wearing a suit and tie every day is like ever coming back. But there's going to be some moments of joy where people want to dress up again coming out of this. So I don't know if that counts for work though.
Yeah, no, I know Ashley and I are both independently watching the Gambler's Gambit, where fashion
That
is,
would be great.
well, it's definitely a good, strong fashion statement.
I have a quick question for Anushka, Bruce, if you don't mind.
Sure, go ahead.
Anushka, how are you guys looking at externalities in your business? Are there like carbon offsets that you guys like offer when people use your services and products because they're avoiding and then what are you doing with MacArthur Foundation and closed loop stuff? Like, how are you thinking about all that?
Yeah, so we're kind of in the process of doing an environmental impact analysis right now. So it's a combination of two things: greenhouse gas emissions measurement, so that we kind of have a baseline from where to improve, and then life cycle analyses on a bunch of different things in our business, so that we understand where we should be investing the most, whether it's carbon offsets for transportation or, whether it's other elements of our business. We actually did some restructuring of our subscription offerings with sort of sustainability and reducing transportation emissions in mind. So, incentivizing customers to consolidate shipments and get the same amount of value, but with less of the sort of back and forth that people have just gotten really used to, I think, in the world of online shopping and sort of just like carefree returns. We try to make our returns really easy, but then the downside of that is like, if it's too easy, then, you're sort of generating all these emissions from that. So we're partnering with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation on our life cycle analyses, and sort of they're acting as our third party, which has been, great so far to work with them on that. And then we'll be assessing all kinds of things. But yeah, transportation offset is definitely one of those things.
That was a great question, Donnell. Thanks for asking that. We don't have much time left, really no time, but real quickly, Melita Tedesco, former student, asked about if you were launching a new fashion brand now, what would your priorities be and how would you do it? So you only have a few seconds on this one, but
yeah,
anything you do different?
I think it's table stakes to make sure that you're producing in a sustainable way. So, ethical factories, sustainable fabrics, that's like table stakes. That's not a feature anymore. Like, it's got to be part of the product. Direct to consumer, obviously, that's like so obvious. You already know that, but building community is important to build brand love and stand for something as a brand. It's actually maybe a good time to be starting a brand, because there's so many that have just gone out of business that had sort of like the ball and chain of brick and mortar stores or any of those other things. So I say go for it. Design some great stuff and come sell it to Rent the Runway.
Sounds great. We are out of time. Thanks so much for this. These are tough questions. It's hard to ask you to think about the policy changes, which we have not even fully heard about. Think about the consequences for your businesses. They're very, systemic, if you wish. We're talking about health and energy, the impacts of the pandemic on your business, Anushka. And you guys did great to answer them. And I want to thank you on the part of all of CBS for taking your time tonight and joining us. Well, thanks very much, and my applause to you.
Thank you.
Thank
Night.
you.
Thank
Good
you.
night.